Hey, if you're taking notes this morning, I want you to write down, please, strike the ground. Strike the ground. We're continuing this morning in on our series on victory, and the victory specifically of Jesus. I wanted to just kind of go back just for a second and talk about 2 weeks ago. I touched on a particular portion of the subject, but ultimately it's the idea of coming into every battle, both spiritual and natural, and in the natural, with what we call a championship mentality, which is that I'm not coming into something that maybe I'm struggling with or I'm dealing with. I'm not coming into it saying, I hope that this time it's different. I hope that this time I'll succeed. I hope that this time I'll actually have breakthrough. But every time that we struggle, either spiritually or naturally, our mentality has to be, this time I will win. I'll be honest with you, I have never heard a Super Bowl winner or an NBA championship winner or anything like that. I've never heard anybody say, man, we just went into this season thinking to ourselves, we really hope we make it. I really hope we win a few games. Champions win before they win. I got to say that again because I feel like there's some people that need to hear that. Champions win before they win. They have the mentality that I will win because I've won before. I'm going to win now because it's happened before. See, the one thing I love about the difference, maybe even if we're talking about a spiritual victory, is that if you're from a culture, let's say you're a Cleveland Brown fan, God bless you. It is what it is. You're coming from a culture that doesn't really have much of a championship mentality. You can't really look back in your immediate future and say to yourself, well, we can win because we've won before. They haven't won since they merged into the NFL. I mean, let's be honest with ourselves. It's been a pretty rough road for Browns fans. The beauty of, if we're talking about the victory of Jesus, is that every victory stems from the victory at the cross and at the tomb. Every victory starts right there. See, I don't ever have to look at it and say, maybe what I have is deficient. Rather, I say, I already won the victory in Christ, and now I am going to win in whatever issue it is that I'm dealing with. Amen? The victory of Jesus, and I have to have you understand this, is both now and not yet. The victory of Jesus is both right now and not yet. How many of you are still believing for victory in some area of your life? Maybe it's finances, maybe it's healing, maybe you've got an addiction that the Lord has been putting on your heart and you've been struggling and striving with. The victory of Jesus is both right now and in the future. See, now we don't want to mistake any of that, because the final victory of the believer is when we go to be with Jesus. And the final victory of the kingdom is when Jesus returns. But I have to have you know this, because there are some Christians that they so overfocus on the return of Jesus that they forget that there's also victory right now. There's victory right now. Can I tell you something? You don't have to struggle your whole life. You don't have to struggle your whole life. There is going to come a day, there's somebody in this room this morning that you've been struggling with an addiction, and it's been something that's been on you and on you and on you, and for years and years and years, you've gone back and forth and back and forth, and you've been in a cycle of futility. But I hear the Lord saying to you, that struggle will not be for the rest of your life. But we have got to come into it saying, I have won, and now I will win. Jesus won, and I'm going to win. Amen? If there's one thing that I see super clearly in Scripture, it's that though the ending is assured, the road that marks it is not for the faint of heart or the faithless in spirit. Once again, I like to use a lot of sports, kind of analogies, and it's okay. I realize that Paul did that too with the Greeks. He talked about racing a lot. Wasn't a whole lot of racing in Jewish culture, so he actually used sports analogies for the Greeks because they really understood it. So I'm going to use a lot of sports analogies on you. You're just going to have to get used to it. Anyway, I'll be honest with you. At the end of a season, I've never heard a champion say, man, that was really easy. Man, we didn't even really, we didn't train that hard in the off season. There was never really any moment where we felt like we were behind. There was never a moment where we had to gut it out. There was never a moment where we felt like this might not work. It was just easy. You know why? Because even though your mentality is that I will be victorious, how many of you know that even in victory, there are always setbacks? I think in the entire history of the NFL, there have been two seasons in which a team did not lose any one game. And in only one of those cases did that team actually win the Super Bowl. By the way, that wasn't the Patriots. Yes! I don't know that I ever had quite as much pleasure watching a team lose in the Super Bowl as I did the Patriots the year that they lost when they were 16-0, and then they lost in the Super Bowl. Good times. So I had to balance that out because a couple of weeks ago I got made fun of by people because I was talking about the Patriots being a good team. Okay, they lost in the Super Bowl. They went 16-0, and then they lost. Okay? It's important. Seeing final victory to the end. Seeing final victory to the end requires discipline and faith. Come on, it doesn't just happen, people. See, even when God says, I will give you the strength, how many of you know that what you don't know you possess can't help you? What you don't know you have can't help you. Look, you could be living under the bridge in downtown Newport tomorrow, and if you had $1 million in a bank account but didn't realize it was accessible, it can't help you. You'd be the richest homeless person in the state. The truth is that there are a lot of believers that because our mentality about the victory of Jesus is that it should be like that all of a sudden something gets hard and we say, well, maybe God doesn't want it for me. I got to tell somebody something. The Lord has never wanted you to walk in addiction, ever. There has never been a person who has said yes to Jesus that God then went on to say, but I want you to walk in addiction because I want you to understand. And I've heard people say stuff like this, so bear with me. Because I want you to understand your need for me. I got to tell you something. Your addiction does not remind you of your need for God. Your addiction reminds you of your need for whatever it is you're addicted to. Your poor handling of your finances does not remind you of your need for God. In fact, many times a poverty mentality, what it will do is it will keep you locked into a position where you believe that being poor is somehow more spiritual. Now, I'm not going to preach a prosperity gospel to you because I don't believe that God wants every person to be rich, but I do believe that God wants everybody to be prosperous in some particular way. And what that means is that whatever God gives you, to steward it well, and you will be well contented with it. Does that make sense? See, you know what's really interesting to me in the parable of the talents is that the only guy that complained about what he had was the guy at the very bottom, and he got rebuked. See, the other guy, the guy with 3, you ever thought about that? The guy with 3 didn't say, well, of course the guy with 5 made 10 more. He had 5. I've only got 3, man. What am I supposed to do with this? Well, you're supposed to do something with it, like steward it well. Now, this might be a little bit debatable, but I don't believe that God wants you to live with your illness. See, there are some people in the room that maybe you've even dealt with something your whole life. Maybe it's depression. Maybe it's a mental thing. Maybe it's a physical thing. I believe that God wants to heal people. But a lot of us, what happens is that we take a hard road, we hit a couple of bumps, and then we begin to build doctrine around our bumps. We build doctrine around our little mountain. And we say, well, God doesn't want to remove this mountain. God doesn't want to remove this mountain. He doesn't want to remove this mountain because I need this mountain so that I can understand the goodness of God. God doesn't need to have you super broken to understand the goodness of God. In fact, it's the restoration of God that actually makes us understand the goodness of God best. You know, I talked a couple of weeks ago about the idea that sometimes we take Romans 8:28 and we say to ourselves, well, you know, we kind of twist it and we think that the meaning is that God makes terrible things happen to people so that people can understand something great so that later you'll have a testimony. Well, that's not true. The enemy has certain schemes. His scheme is to destroy you. He's going to do a lot of terrible things to you, or he's going to try. The beauty of what God does is that he so flips the plan of the enemy on its head that it makes it look like it was his plan the whole time. See, I'll be honest with you, I've had some pretty rough stuff happen to me, but when people ask me, would you have done anything differently? I honestly can't say I would. Because God has done so much in me, and he's done so much to me, and he's turned everything that the enemy meant for evil to good, to the point where I can't imagine what my life would look like without the good and the bad, because without the bad, there's no restoration. And yet, I cannot allow my spirit to believe that God did this to me so that I could be this guy today. Because that's not goodness. Let me put it this way. If I allowed my child to play in the road and then tripped him, and then he got hurt just so that I could show you my goodness by rescuing him, is that good? No. And yet we believe that of God sometimes. That he does terrible things so that later we can have a testimony. What I can tell you is the devil does terrible things, but in comparison to God, he's powerless. So when I bring my brokenness to the Lord and when he heals it, all of a sudden, I don't care if God did it or the devil did it. All I know is I've been healed and I've got a testimony. He took the thing that the enemy meant for evil. He took that arrow that the enemy meant to kill me and he put it in my hand and he said, now shoot it back at him. Yeah. Speaking of arrows, my message this morning is out of 2 Kings. I want you to turn there in your Bibles, please, with me. This is 2 Kings chapter 13. We're just going to start in verse 14, and we're going to go about 6 verses. It says, now Elisha had been suffering from the illness with which he died. And Jehoash, the king of Israel, this is also, if you parallel this, this is Joash. The king of Israel went down to see him and wept over him. My father, he cried, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. Elisha said, get a bow and some arrows. I love that Elisha, isn't it interesting? Elisha's sitting there dying, and Joash comes to him. I'm just going to call him Joash because it's easier for me. Joash comes to him, and he's crying over him. And Elisha doesn't kind of sit with him and, talk with him about all this stuff. He starts right off with, okay, go get a weapon. Go get a weapon. Get a bow. Get some arrows. Elisha said, get a bow and some arrows, and he did so. He says, take the bow in your hands, he said to the king of Israel. And when he had taken it, Elisha put his hands on the king's hands. Open the east window, he said, and he opened it. Shoot, Elisha said, and he shot. The Lord's arrow of victory, the arrow of victory over Aram, Elisha declared. You will completely destroy the Arameans at Aphek. And then he said to him, take the arrows, and the king took them. Elisha told him, strike the ground. And then he struck it 3 times and he stopped. The man of God was angry with him and said, you should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times. Then you would have defeated Aram and completely destroyed it. But now you will defeat it only 3 times. And then Elisha died and was buried. Interesting last words. I mean, really, some interesting last words. Like, can you imagine, like, you're sitting there with a dying prophet, okay? This man was extremely important in Israel. The king goes to him, he's talking to him, and the last words of Elisha, I can't even imagine this. Like, most of us, we want to be surrounded by our loved ones, and we want to tell everybody all that we possibly can about how much we love them in the last moment. Elisha got mad. But you have to understand why. Elisha's ministry was such that the only thing that he had been aiming for his entire life, aside from to just lift up God and to honor the Lord, was to restore Jerusalem, was to restore Israel to a right worship of God, so that someday they could come out from under the oppression of the Syrians, or in this case, the Arameans. His whole life's purpose was this moment. Was this moment of final victory where he's saying, okay, we've got a lot of this, the groundwork is laid, and now is the time that we're going to go into battle, and here's what you have to do. The Lord is already telling you, this right here is the assurance of God's victory. You're going to win. Come on, I got to tell somebody, there's an issue you're struggling with that I felt like the Lord wants me to tell you, you're going to win. You're going to win. The only thing that's at stake here is how big are you going to win? The only thing at stake is how big are you going to win? I'll be honest with you, I've had some victories in certain areas of my life that a few years later, because I didn't do the right things in how I worked it out, I fell back into those things. See, I won, and then I lost worse than I did before. See, whatever God begins, he finishes. When it comes to victory in the life of the believer, there is our part and there's God's part. I got to tell you, God's part is the heavy lifting. God's part is the miraculous. God's part is changing literally changing your body, like changing what you desire, the things that you want. That's God's part. My part is actually the easier part, and yet to me, it's still quite difficult. It's remembering I don't quit ever. I don't stop ever. I don't allow disappointment or rejection to get in the way of what God has told me. I'm going to literally use everything that God has given me in order to obtain victory in whatever area he's told me. That's the area of victory today. Let me give you an example. A lot of the things that we do, how many of you know that an arrow is sort of a small thing? And yet, driven with enough force, it's quite powerful. You're all aware of this? There's the hunters in the room, they're like, yeah, duh, guy, move on. Get to the shooting part. I actually, full disclosure, I did a sermon like this a number of years ago, and I actually shot an arrow out the window. You notice I'm not shooting an arrow out the window this time. There's, eventually you grow up and you stop being a kid and you don't accidentally shoot stuff. And anyway, Candy Craddock was here, I'd keep going, but I'm not going to. Oh, man. So many of you know that I've been on a bit of a weight loss journey this year. I weighed in this morning and I've officially lost like 54 pounds this year. Which, on one hand, it's pretty exciting. Like, I'm excited about it. One of the things that I'm most excited about, though, is that this is the first time I've ever lost weight without a program. Like, I'm not buying like $1,500 or $1,800 worth of diet food. I'm not, taking some kind of no offense to oils peoples, but I'm not taking some particular oil that all of a sudden is magically making a skinnier me. What I decided to do, my wife and I sat down before the first of the year and I said, I can't keep doing this. But for anybody that's ever gone through a program and lost weight, you know that it's actually quite easy to gain that weight back. Because most of the time what happens with a program is that they teach you how to lose weight on the program. But then all of a sudden you lose all the weight and all of your old habits are still there. All of your old things are just still right there. In fact, statistically speaking, people, and I'm a living embodiment of this, by the way, people who lose weight with weight loss programs tend to regain the weight plus an additional 10 to 20 pounds within a year. Because it's nice to have a product that helps you, but ultimately, if you have not created the right pathways to change, you'll always end up in the same place. See, if my GPS is off, every time I use it, it's going to send me in the wrong direction. If my direction is off, anytime that I'm shooting for a particular thing, and I think I'm going north, but I'm really going south, where am I going to end up? I'm going to think I'm going north, but I'm going to always end up south. So this time around, I sat down with my wife and I said, we've got to do something different, and it has to be sustainable. I don't want to spend another $5,000 or $2,000 or $1,800 doing something that probably isn't going to be a long-term solution for me. Can I tell you, there's nothing worse than getting victory over something and then have it come back. There's nothing worse. And so one of the things that I realized as I started in on this journey where I actually had to, learn how to be disciplined, every day, not just for a couple of months. One of the things I realized is that for the most part, it's small changes that people really need. Most of the time, what we're thinking is, I have a large problem. That was a pun. Come on. I have a large problem, therefore, I need to make a large change. That's typically not true. Sometimes I don't need a sword. I need an arrow. But actually what I need is 5 or 6 arrows. I don't need one giant change. I need 5 or 6 minor changes that I'm going to do all the time. You know what's interesting is I found myself at least 2 meals a day always doing the same thing. I eat farm, I'm just going to say this like a super hipster because I feel like one. I eat like a farm fresh 3-egg omelet with some chicken sausage, organic onions, and organic green peppers every morning. It's less than 500 calories. I'm just saying, it's the real deal, okay? Every day for lunch, I eat about a 5-ounce piece of chicken breast and a salad. My wife and I, a couple weeks ago, we went to a particular thing, and we, you know, it's hard to eat right when you're having to eat out all the time. Like you go to a restaurant, and even their salad is like 1,200 calories. And I don't know that I've ever said this before in my entire life, but I could tell that Jesus was doing some real work when I said it. After I got done at this particular lunch, I was like, oh my gosh, I need a salad. And I meant it. I needed a salad. There was something in me that I have trained my body to like rabbit food, okay? I have trained myself to where all of a sudden, you know what I don't want? I don't really want fried chicken. I mean, I kind of want fried chicken, but I don't really want fried chicken. I want a salad. This is nuts. And I'm not saying that so you can be like, oh, great job, Joel. No, I'm saying it is possible to change, and most of the changes that we make are minor. But see, a minor change that is used with discipline and coupled with faith is going to equal breakthrough in your life. I was thinking about like actually pulling the bow back to like tell you, you know, about tension and all that kind of stuff. But I started recently lifting weights again. And my shoulders are basically dead. So. One key I had to grab a hold of actually was this, is that one bad day, one bad weekend, or even one bad week doesn't mean you quit. If you want breakthrough, you're not always going to be successful. But success is not a moment, it's a lifestyle. I have to create a lifestyle in which I continue to walk in a pathway and model for success because I know it's going to succeed. See, the issue is that a lot of people, whether it's that they're contending for healing, or they're trying to get their finances right, or they're trying to figure out how to parent their children. Come on, some people dealing with some anger issues this morning might think to themselves, gosh, man, I was doing so good, and then I yelled at my kid this morning. Well, you know what you do this afternoon? You apologize and you move on. And you keep going. If you want to have breakthrough, the issue is not that you'll never fail. The greater issue is, are you willing to keep going even when you have failed in a small thing? See, most of us, what we do is because we're thinking that if I don't do this 100% right the whole time, I'm going to fail in this entire thing. And I've done this, where I've gotten discouraged because I had a bad weekend, or I got discouraged because I had a rough day. And then instead of saying, you know what, but tomorrow is another day and his mercies are new every morning, I think to myself, well, I guess that's it. I guess I didn't have it. I guess God wanted me to be like this. Maybe this is how he keeps me humble. Man, can I tell you something? God doesn't need your issue to keep you humble. Come on, he's the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. If you can honestly have pride in front of him, you got bigger issues than your weight or your addiction. Sometimes this is our mentality. We see a measure of breakthrough, but then we back up. We encounter challenges, and we rethink what God has told us. We encounter resistance, and we think to ourselves, okay, is this really what God told me to do? Is this really what God told me to do? Man, can I tell you? If you're encountering resistance on your path to victory, you're actually doing the right thing, not the wrong thing. Victory is never easy. When God told me that he'd help me, I didn't think it would be like this. See, my thought is when God tells me he's going to help me, that everything's magically going to be different. I'm like, yes, everything's wonderful. I'm so much better now. Like I can just feel it in my bones. Most of the time, though, Like a good father, God just doesn't give us something. He shows us the pathway to sustain it. A couple of points to consider, and then I'm going to be done. Number one is that victory requires zeal. Victory requires zeal. Forgive me for talking a little bit too much about like my weight loss stuff. It's a season that I'm in right now. So, it's like when your kid's a teenager and you just tell all your friends all the stories about your teenager kid and everybody goes through that time, I'm in this season, so you're just going to have to deal with it. So, I'm going to be honest with you, it'd be really convenient for me if this thing was done right now. Like at one time, no joke, I heard about this faith healer, and she's a wonderful lady. I've actually met her. She's, incredible. But I heard this story about how she actually would pray for fat, no joke, she would pray for fat people, and like the next day they'd wake up and they'd lose like 40 pounds. And I was like, I need to call that lady. I need that anointing in my life, right? See, it would be really convenient for me if this whole thing was like, if I could be like done with like the major weight loss portion of it right now. But actually my goal sheet tells me, because I have a goal sheet, this is crazy. I've got a goal sheet. My goal sheet tells me that it's going to be about a year until I actually hit my goal. And then I have to continue in this lifestyle so that I don't, 5 years from now, preach this exact same message and have the exact same analogies. Because I've got to learn the pathway to success, and not just that, but I've got to learn how to sustain it. See, there are a lot of us that what the issues that we are dealing with, we're crying out to the Lord for a miraculous breakthrough. And actually what God is telling you is He's saying, you know what, my grace is new for you every day. It's enough for you in the moment. Hey man, there are some people, I'm telling you, God wants to miraculously heal you. And then there's some other people that He's saying, I want to walk with you through the journey so that you don't fall back into this same thing next week. Because how many of you in here have ever returned to your sin? You've ever returned to your addiction? Man, I have. See, Joash, I want you to understand that Joash was a little uncomfortable with what the prophet asked him to do. I got to be honest with you. Prophets are weird. They do weird, strange things sometimes. Now, that doesn't mean that they're always going to be weird and you should just accept weirdness from people because, he's prophetic. But rather, there are certain times and there are certain seasons in which God actually asks us to do certain things that are going to be uncomfortable because they're not really natural. See, we read the Bible and we think to ourselves, it's totally natural that Elisha would ask Joash to take some arrows and strike the ground with it. But you got to keep this in mind. There wasn't like a piano in the background, okay? There wasn't like this kind of holy moment going on and they'd been prepared for this by a sermon. He literally walked in, he started crying over him, and then Elisha said to him, grab a bow and some arrows. Okay? Do whatever you want, man. You're on your deathbed. This sounds okay. So he gets the bow and the arrows, and then he shoots it out the window like Elijah tells him to. And then he gets uncomfortable with it because he doesn't understand what Elisha's trying to get him to do. He's trying to get him to call out every victory that the Lord is going to give him. See, it's really interesting. The terminology of strike the ground. My mentality before I really studied this out was, it meant he was literally hitting the ground with it. No, what he was telling him was, shoot every single arrow that's in your quiver right now. Take every little thing that God has given you and start hitting the ground with every single, keep hitting the ground until you run out of things to throw. Keep striking the ground with every weapon that the Lord has given you, and you will get victory over this thing. I almost said half it. Don't half-heart this thing. If you want it, take everything that God has given you and keep striking the ground until you have nothing left. Man, how many times have we gained partial victory over something, but we left it alive? We left a back door. We left an open window. And how many of you know it can crawl right back in and it gets more powerful and it gets stronger? See, Joash lacked the appropriate level of zeal in his response to Syria. You got to keep in mind, we have some nations in the earth today that we would generally view as being kind of crazy, insane people. When you look throughout the Bible, you have to understand that the whole area was filled with nations like this. Ancient warfare was not fought on a distant battlefield. It wasn't fought in some rice paddy somewhere. It wasn't fought on just a plot of desert in the middle of nowhere. The way a nation in those times would gain total victory is total destruction. This was kill or be killed. There were generally very few peace treaties, especially amongst smaller nations. Sometimes what you'd see larger empires that would be willing to assimilate certain portions of cultures into their empire, but most of the time, our idea of warfare and the ancient idea of warfare are very different. Our idea of warfare is you fight until somebody else gives up. The ancient idea of warfare was you fight until everyone is dead. That's pretty much what they did. See, Joash didn't understand that the Syrians didn't just want their gold, they wanted their lives. They wanted their land, and they wanted them dead. I got to tell you something. There's some people in here today that don't realize that the enemy doesn't just want what you have, he wants you dead. Now, I don't want to put the focus too much on the enemy, because I think when Christians start getting all scared of the devil, I just don't understand it, to be honest with you. But at the same time, we have to be aware that our enemy is not out. He's not out to just silence you. He's out to kill you and to destroy you. There are certain things that have been seeded into your life, whether it was by your poor choices or someone else's poor choices, that are not just designed to silence you, they're designed to destroy you. You have to have the appropriate level of response. And that response is a zealous one. There's got to come a point in your life where the thing that you're thinking about right now, and I'm not talking about a relationship, I'm talking about maybe you've struggled in an area of addiction. Maybe you've struggled in an area of maybe your finances, but there's something in you that says, this is a big deal for me. My lack of self-control, maybe there's somebody in here who's got a pornography addiction. There's got to be a point in time in which you begin to hate that thing. Not hate yourself for it, but you've got to have an appropriately zealous response to what you're dealing with, or you will never fully get rid of it. It will always be the thing that you can lean back on because, I don't have a drinking problem. I just have a moderation problem. Friend, I can tell you there are very few people that have had a drinking problem that can eventually learn moderation. See, most people that learn moderation, they'll tell you that they haven't really had much of an idea or a desire to get wasted all the time. If your whole life you have learned, maybe as you started in high school or junior high or whatever, to tank like 12 or 13 beers at a time, the likelihood that you'll be able to learn how to drink 3 is pretty low. So maybe the better response is, I have a drinking problem, I need to stop. Sometimes what we think is, if I can just manage my addiction, I'll be okay. Managing your addiction doesn't make you any less addicted. Are you aware of that? Managing the thing that is destroying your life is not an appropriate response to getting rid of it. See, Joash came into this entire thing and he's like, okay, I'm just going to placate the prophet. Oh, man, it's really hard to shoot all these arrows. 1, man, my arms. 2, this is super awkward. We're just hanging out in this guy's house. 3, cool. And then the prophet says to him, dude, I told you that these were the Lord's arrow of victory, and you held on to 3 of them. Why wouldn't you use everything in your arsenal? Let me put it to you this way. I talked about this 2 weeks ago, but Peter says it, and he says, you have been given everything that you need for a life of godliness and righteousness. What's left in your quiver that you haven't used yet? Number 2, victory requires a declaration before the breakthrough. I love this. Elijah said to Ahab, "Go up and eat and drink, for there is the sound of a rushing rain." And so Ahab went up to eat and drink, and Elijah went up to the top of Mount Carmel, and he bowed himself down to the earth and put his face between his knees. Okay, so here's what Elijah does. And this is after his victory over the prophets of Baal and Asherah on Mount Carmel. It was an incredibly epic moment. And then when that victory was done, he prophetically declared to the king Ahab, he said, "Look, the 3-year drought is ending right now. I hear the sound of the abundance of rain." Then what did he do? He didn't just wait back for it and say, "Here it comes." He actually postured himself so much so that he was down praying, and he was so in this, right? It was almost like, I can't look. And he kept praying, and he kept praying, and he kept praying. And then he sent a guy up to go look for him. He said, "Now go up to the top of the mountain and look for me. I can't even bring myself to get out of this posture. I need you to go look for me." So the guy goes up and he comes back and he says, "Yeah, there's nothing." And so Elisha says, geez, okay. No, he continued in the posture, and he kept praying, and then he finally says, "Okay, go and check again. One more time, go back up, check again." And the guy goes up again, nothing. And so Elijah continues to pray. He doesn't give up just because he tried a second time. There's a third time. Our mentality is, hey man, the third time's a charm, right? Well, that's witchcraft. No, I'm just kidding. No, at the third time he says, "Okay, go up." And the guy goes up, comes back and says, "I'm getting tired. There's nothing there." And Elijah sends him back a 4th and a 5th and a 6th time. I mean, at this point, I'm thinking that the guy he keeps sending is probably getting in some pretty good shape. And then the 7th time, I love this. The 7th time, the guy comes back and he says, "I saw a cloud, but it's the size of a man's hand. It's not really that big." But Elijah knew right then. He's like, "That's it. That's my breakthrough. It might be small in its moment, but something's better than nothing. And that small thing, by my faith, by my declaration, and by the victory of God, that small thing is going to turn into a big thing real quick." So then he tells Ahab, he actually tells him, he says, "Now get in your chariot and roll out. Because if you don't get down the mountain right now, you're going to be stopped by a torrent of rain." And so he begins, and then it says that I love it. It says he hiked up his robes and he started running down the mountain. He actually beat the king down to the bottom of the mountain. But by the time they got down there was such a deluge that came down that if he hadn't come down the mountain, he wouldn't be able to. Come on, I'm telling you, there's some people in here that I've got to remind you of something. You have got to stop looking at these things in your life that you're saying, "I need victory over this," and you've got to start saying, "I will have victory over this." Because God cannot lie. What God has spoken to me will come to pass. But there is a marriage here. There is a responsibility that I have to say, I don't care how long it takes. I won't quit. I don't care how long it is coming. I won't quit. Because I know that by the perseverance of my faith, not only is character established, but God is giving glory. There is a perseverance I think that the church needs to get back. Come on, y'all didn't respond very well to that. There is a perseverance I believe that the church needs to start getting back. Because every single one of us grew up with a microwave. Some of you were a little older when you first saw it. But you learned how to appropriate it pretty quickly. I'll tell you, sometimes we have so changed our faith to fit our culture that we've forgotten that we might live in a microwave culture, but we have a crockpot God. Okay? I'm sorry I just used that terminology, but just bear with me, okay? First of all, everything that comes out of a crockpot is much better than comes out of a microwave. And secondly, it requires a little bit of planning and perseverance on my part, okay? If you didn't put something in the crock pot this morning, you can't just hope that you're going to get home and be like, open up a crock pot and be like, hey, Hey! There's got to be something in you that says, I may live in a microwave culture, but I've got to learn how to persevere like I'm waiting on a crock pot. And sometimes that's a lot of perseverance because you smell those juices cooking and you're like, oh, 2 more hours. Glory. Glory. I love this. This is James 5, 17 and 18. Can I get a tinkly player? The anointed tinklies? Come on. I love this. James 5, 17 and 18 says, Elijah was a man with a nature like ours. You know what James is saying? He's just like you. He's just like me. There wasn't anything particularly and overly special about him. Oh, thanks, buddy. Elijah was a man with a nature like ours. And yet he prayed fervently that it might not rain. And for 3 years and 6 months, it did not rain on the earth. And then he prayed again, and heaven gave rain, and the earth bore its fruit. We prophesy to our mountain, not because we're naming it and claiming it, but because we believe that whatever we ask for that's in the will of God will come to pass. Like I said earlier, God doesn't gain glory by your addiction. He gains glory by its destruction. God doesn't gain glory. He doesn't gain glory in your affliction. He gains glory in its healing. God doesn't gain glory by you being poor. He gains glory by you being prosperous and content in it. And last one. Don't stop on 6. Don't stop on 6. See, most of the time we quit right when we're on the cusp of breakthrough. Man, come on. What would have happened if Elijah had stopped on that 6th time? Nothing. What would have happened? What would have happened if the Israelites, as they were going around the city of Jericho, on that 6th day decided, this is dumb. Why are we doing this? This is so embarrassing. Guys, this is so embarrassing. We're literally just walking around this city. We can't even say anything. We're just marching around it. This is so embarrassing. I love biblical numerology. There's so many times in the scripture where the prophetic number of 7 produced breakthrough. See, 6, which we know as the number of man, let me just maybe translate this in a different way for you today, is the number of self-sufficiency. See, I'm going to do this a few more times because I know I still got the power and the strength to do it. See, I can climb up and I can pull myself up by the bootstraps and I can get this done one more time because I've got the strength for it. See, but the interesting thing is that God isn't giving glory by you having more strength. See, there are so many of us that what happens is that we have a particular issue that we've been gearing on and we've been focusing on, and we try and we try and we try and we try and we stop because there's something in us that says, hey, if it isn't working, why are you doing it? Right? If you keep falling, if you keep failing, why do you keep after it? Because I know that I have a certain level of strength, but I love that the number 7 is the number of completion, or at the very minimum in this case, divine completion. See, this is the moment where God's strength now meets my weakness. See, I don't have any more strength in me to say, I'm going to get up one more time. All I'm saying is, God, I'm going to try to get up. Because I know that what you spoke is true. I know that I am determined to live in victory, even if I don't have the strength yet to see it through. See, this is where the miracle happens. This is where that moment comes where you're saying, you know what? I don't even know if I have enough faith to get back up, but I'm going to try. I don't even know if I have enough strength to do it again, but I'm going to try. Because I'm going to believe that God is able even when I'm not. And all of a sudden, that divine anointing is imparted. My weakness now becomes my greatest strength. My place of failure now becomes the floor for my victory. Man, I'm telling you, there are some people right now you've been in a valley for a while. And what I mean by that is that you've been in a very low place, but I'm telling you that this is not a hopeless moment for you. Today is one of those days where you get to determine, is this going to be my low point, or is this going to be my valley of victory? Is this going to be the place where I say, you know what? I'm not going to come back here because I'm going to get back up and I'm going to try to climb that mountain one more time. I'm going to believe that God is able even in my weakness. Come on, friend, don't stop on 6. Don't stop when you think that you can't go on anymore. We don't serve a God that requires you to be strong. We serve a God that requires us to have faith.